Hey folks, Randy Newberg here with another episode of Leupold's Hunt Talk Radio. It is summer. Yeah, summer is just moving right along here in Bozeman, Montana. Today I'm joined by a past guest, communications, marketing, messaging, you name it, at Boone Crockett Club, Keith Balfourd. Keith is in town, and he and I always enjoy some good conversations about what they're seeing, what they're doing. Boone Crockett Club has a tendency to push the discussions out there a little further to get people to think more, and I always enjoy that. I love reading what they produce, what they put out in their Fair Chase magazine. And I think when you get done listening to this, if you haven't already been made aware, you will be, of how influential the Boone Crockett Club has been, the oldest conservation group of any of the hunting conservation groups, going back to 1880 something. Keith will have the exact date, but anyhow, the topic I wanted to talk about today is, and Keith is, his background, I don't know if there's such a term as expert, but if there is an expert, it's Keith, on the topic of how the Fair Chase principle that is embodied with the idea of self-restraint was also the principle that got us this conservation recovery in America. How it was self-restraint, it was thinking about the next generation, about giving more than you took. All those things are almost a parallel between the concept of fair chase and the conservation ethic that's built the conservation recovery in our country. So it's always great when Keith is here. He's probably wondering, I don't know, this Newberg guy, maybe I shouldn't be on this podcast. Every time I'm on his podcast, seem to get some crazy emails. But that's why we call it Randy Newberg Unfiltered. But I want to thank Leupold. Leupold's a big supporter of so many things. I see Keith nodding his head over there. Leupold's a big supporter of the Boone Crockett Club and all their conservation work. Big supporter of the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation. If you're into hunting, conservation, public lands, access, Leupold is there putting a lot of effort into those things, and they're doing it quietly, but I'm here to tell you they're doing it. I wish they didn't do it so quietly. I wish they would beat their drum a little more, but that's who they are. If you're going to buy some optics, I can't think of a better company to go and get your optics from. Based in Beaverton, Oregon, family-owned business, been there for a long time. So, and then we have Orion Coolers. Orion Coolers is, and they've been in this podcast almost since the beginning, I think. And for our listeners, they want to make sure everybody gets a great cooler at a great price. So they're giving you 20% off if you go to orioncoolers.com and use promo code RANDY. There you go. Just saved you 20% on a really, really good cooler. And then we have Onyx Maps. They're just the tool that you don't leave home without. If you leave home without your Onyx, odds are you're going to regret it. So, going to save you some money here also, 20% off at onyxmaps.com if you use promo code RANDY to buy one of their app products. And then we have Go Hunt. GoHunt.com. They have their insider program that we use, and it's how we do all of our research. So many of you hear us talk about it. We do videos about tag applications and everything else, and podcasts about tag applications. Well, if you want to see what it is, now's your chance. They have a 30-day free trial, and to get there, you go to gohunt.com/Randy, RANDY, and they'll give you a 30-day look behind the curtains free trial. Right now, they got a really good article out there about the over-the-counter elk options. Very detailed strategy article. And if you do that, I think they're going to keep that running until sometime through September of 19, maybe. I don't know. I know for sure it's going through September. And then also, they have an amazing gear shop out there. If you're into backcountry hunting, the Go Hunt Gear Shop has pretty much everything you could be looking for. And if you go there and you check out and use promo code Randy at their gear shop, they'll give you 10% off. So there you go. Saved you a whole bunch of money today, and I hope that you'll hang in here and listen as Keith and I talk about a lot of conservation history, how hunting and its conservation ethic got formed, and what role fair chase and self-restraint played in all that. So thanks for being here. Well, folks, I told you that our guest here was going to be a past guest who we've shared a microphone a time or two, a person who I call frequently when I'm struggling through the quandaries of hunting behavior, hunting messaging, topics related to conservation, fair chase, you name it. Keith Balfourd from the Boone Crockett Club is burdened with my inquiries probably more often than he'd like. So
I don't know if I can live up to that build-up, Randy, but I enjoy our conversations. That's for sure.
Well, thanks for taking the time to put on the headset and have a conversation with the audience here.
Happy to.
You and I seem to run a lot of the same circles thanks to the industry trade shows and conventions and summits, and we get to hear a lot of the same stuff, interact with some of the same crowds, but the messaging, the things that you guys are writing about in Fair Chase magazine is really, it captures me. I know you're going to be humble, as you always are, Keith, and you're going to be, well, that's just our job. But you guys at Boone and Crockett, in your Fair Chase publication, and even your social media and other stuff, you're taking on the hard topics. You're not backing away from them.
Well, yeah. I mean, I guess if you stand it all on end to end, that's what it sure looks like. That's just a responsibility, I think, that goes, way back to the founding fathers of, there are just certain things that we can't look the other way on. They are going to come back up and bite you. Whistling past the graveyard, as they say. And, some of these topics, they pop up and they marinate for a while, and you think, well, yeah, nobody wants to talk about that.
Yeah.
But they don't go away. And we're living in a different time now where you certainly have organized efforts that just don't understand hunting, won't look at it objectively, very vocal against it, don't understand conservation, don't understand the North American model. And you're really looking for those soft spots where they can squeeze and drum up support for their ideology of, whatever that is. Yeah. Pretty clear that, ending all hunting is on top of their list, and they're using different strategies to do that. And so, we're kind of forced into these conversations, like it or not. And the good news is we've said this before, science is I don't want to say on our side, but in support. The history of conservation is in support of sportsmen. And I always equate it to, hunters like you, me, most of the people we know, and I assume most of your listeners just like going about our business.
Right.
I mean,
don't bother me with this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, what's the deal? What's the rub? Why are you in my wheelhouse? And I think I'm seeing more people frustrated with these attacks and outright lies, as all of us know. And then when it switches over to, our public image of hunters and hunting, and quickly that turns into a conversation about ethics, code, standards, laws, fair chase,
behavior.
Yeah. I just see more and more people wrestling with that topic, and I only say wrestling with it in a negative way, wrestling with it in a good way. They're trying to process this. They're trying to understand. This is just how we do things. We're not really good at articulating the why, but it sounds like we need to do a better job of explaining the why.
Yeah.
So that's where I think you, me, the club gets engaged in these conversations, and people want to know. They want to be better equipped. They want to be better versed. So I always feel like what I can contribute is the historical perspective. I mean, Boone Crockett's 134 years old now.
Yeah.
Roosevelt started this whole ethical sportsman code, fair chase thing. And so we've got a lot of history with it. We've got a lot of history of watching it evolve, talking about it, explaining it.
Leading policy related to that.
Yeah. There's, I mean, in any, I guess in any activity that's worthwhile, pick anything. There's rules of the road. There's standards. There's a code. There's order. And if there was an order, there'd just be chaos, and that activity would eventually become unacceptable.
Right.
Either to the people that are participating in it, saying, "Well, wait a minute. I mean, this is just a free for all, so I'm out." Mm-hmm. And then the people that are looking at it objectively or not objectively
from
outside are going, "For sure, this is a free for all. This has got to go."
Yeah.
So, getting back to the historical part, I think that's a great piece of the conversation that Boone and Crockett can bring to it.
Mm-hmm.
And in its most fundamental sense, fair chase is about restraint.
Yeah.
Self-restraint.
Mm-hmm.
And that is what conservation is.
Yeah.
Conservation is about restraint. And conservation requires the discipline of restraint. And so this was Roosevelt's genius. He was lining these things up together. On one hand, he and the early members of the club were putting forth this new idea of how to treat natural resources. Mm-hmm. Save some for tomorrow. Use them, but use them wisely. Conserve, that whole...
Right. And conservation really wasn't even a term.
It wasn't
in the
a term.
American lexicon.
No, it wasn't a term.
They came along.
Grinnell is one of the first to try and codify that and says, well, this is really what we're doing. We're trying to save stuff.
Yeah.
So this whole concept of fair chase was an anchor point or foundational to conservation.
Yeah.
Roosevelt wanted hunting to continue. He wanted wildlife to recover and thrive. Back in the day, obviously, we know that story. Wildlife was in serious jeopardy from overharvest.
Yeah.
And truth be told, it wasn't all commercial market hunting. There was thrill killing going on, and there was unregulated sport hunting, if you want to call it sport hunting, and subsistence hunting. So, I mean, all these things took their toll. And, here's Roosevelt and Grinnell and Leupold and some of those guys standing up and going, okay, we got the answer here. The answer is, here's how we're going to save wildlife. We're going to continue to hunt them. I mean, completely counterintuitive.
Even today, when you tell somebody that, it's counterintuitive.
Counterintuitive. I mean, the sales pitch of the century. But right along with that, in the same breath, is the yeah, but. Yeah, but now there's going to be order. Now there's going to be laws. And that's where fair chase came in.
Yeah.
And it not only had to be sold to sportsmen of the day because they were used to the unlimited take,
Yeah, don't tell me.
24/7, 365 hunting season, no bag limits. It's all there for the taking. But this concept of a sportsman started to arise, when there was no longer a necessity to feed family. hunting started to transition into a recreational activity. And, if you get real philosophical about it, it's in our blood, it's in our roots as human beings. We've been hunter-gatherers since
forever.
We first started walking upright. So when it became more recreational, that's when more people started to grasp this idea of order, discipline, self-restraint. We got to recover this wildlife so we can wisely use them in the future. And fair chase came along, and it kind of set the tone. It defined what it meant to be a sportsman. One who hunted for personal reasons, not profit. And then it also established our game laws.
Yeah.
Game laws were based on that same recover wildlife, treat wildlife with respect. Hunting is a tradition. It's a privilege. It needs to be codified. It needs to be conducted ethically. And once we had game laws established, we also had a definition for what poaching was.
Yeah. And what not to do.
Yeah, think about that. I mean, okay, here's hunting over here, and this is something else.
Right.
And I think we've talked about this before, and we've already talked today about, being forced into these conversations. Well, we've got organized efforts out there trying to lump hunting and poaching into the same sentence.
Right.
And that's just not going to lead us to a good place.
No, and the funny part or ironic part of that is it was the hunters who made that distinction at the very beginning, and now people want to try blend them as the same thing.
Yep.
And they wonder why hunters have this immediate response of, don't call that person a hunter, they're a poacher. And to maybe a journalist or a reporter, they're like, well, dead animal, killed with a firearm, all the same thing.
Yep.
No, for us, the nuance is more than just nuance. It's striking, it's delineated.
It's a clear line.
And it's been part of the historical delineation for 130 years.
Yeah. Well, again, ever since bear chase came onto the scene, these other things start being compartmentalized as, no, that's against the law. That's no respect for the resource. That's not with under any type of scientific management. Now we call it stealing. This is theft. This is wildlife theft. This is wildlife crime. So that's another little fun factoid about fair chase.
Yeah.
It's got some do's and don'ts.
Yeah.
And society has those everywhere.
We got it when you jump in your car and got to wear your seatbelt. You can't talk on your phone while you're driving. I mean, every part of our daily life has a do and a don't.
Thinking about that driving over here. There's just some rules of the road that society's established for a long time. Respect women, hold the door, put the toilet seat down. If you borrow something, return it in good condition. Treat it as if it was your own. Respect the flag. Honor our servicemen and women. These are all good citizen stuff.
Right.
And I believe, maybe jaded a little bit, but all the hunters I know are those kind of people.
Right.
They're adhering not only to ethical standards in hunting, but in their daily lives, how they treat other people, business relationships, how they do business, honesty, integrity, self-reliance, self-determination, self-control, back to fair chase and conservation.
Yeah.
And, this is just things that people do to have and keep friends. I mean, if you're on the outside of all that stuff, you're swimming against the current.
Yeah. I just finished. I'd read the book previously, Douglas Brinkley's biography about Roosevelt, the Wilderness Warrior, and I read that quite a few years ago. And then I just bought it on Audible again because I've been traveling so much. I thought,
You travel a lot?
yeah. I must travel almost as much as you, Keith, because we see each other seldom in Montana, mostly
Always
in
on the
other
road
locations.
somewhere,
But he goes into this part, and he's trying to lay the context of how Roosevelt's wise use, fair chase, there's boundaries, there's right and wrong, came from his efforts all formed through hunting, of helping being one of the founders of the Boone Crockett Club, and how he brought to the White House, because when was the Boone Crockett Club founded?
1887.
Yeah, so 14 years before he becomes president, he's already institutionalizing this concept of we have to have self-restraint. We have to think about tomorrow and the future and the greater good. And he starts all that stuff, if you connect the dots the way Brinkley has, it came from his hunting. And him seeing the tragedies of what he'd thought about as a youngster, and then comes to the Dakotas, and it's like, it's already gone. How did this happen? All that stuff. And then he becomes president, and in his entire effort between him and Pinchot and others to put some sanity to our public lands policy, to wildlife refuges, to the exploitation of what is remaining of wildlife, especially with the National Wildlife Refuge System and Pelican Island and all that. He brought all that with him from the hunting side of things.
Sure.
And it was widely accepted, well, maybe by society. He was a populist guy. Maybe some in Congress didn't accept it quite as well as the rest of society. But there was a fair chase ethics in the hunting space that he brought those same principles to how
he was the square deal guy when he was a commissioner in New York City or what have you.
Yeah. And as he talked about the need of self-discipline and self-restraint to conserve wildlife, he applied that same thing to the public lands and the public estates and the forests and the streams and the wildlife itself. So he brings that as president to the United States, the office of, well, commander-in-chief. And since his time, that principle or those principles of, protecting or conserving, having self-restraint for those in the future, nurturing, growing this and recovering it, has become accepted as part of the American idea of conservation.
Absolutely. He actually, too, if you think about it, he nationalized that whole deal. Mm-hmm. He's on record saying that, conservation is a duty of citizenship. He ranked that right up there with religion, commitment to family, commitment to one's own career, the military, defending the country, nationalism, that whole thing that's getting battered around right now. And that, besides sportsmen, sportsmen have always been in the minority. Mm-hmm. That nationalism concept appealed to the rest and said, hey, our greatest treasure is our national resources.
Yeah.
And we've got to take care of those things. And, if you look at his track record in legislation and the stuff that the Boone Crockett Club was able to do in legislation, it's all aimed at that same institutionalizing, federal public lands, and access to those lands, and
conserving the forests,
Pinchot was a use guy, and he saw value that there's some forests that we need for timber production, and there are some forests that we need for wildlife and needs to be set aside. So he figured that out.
Yeah. So here we are. So let's see. Roosevelt took the office in 1901. So we're 118 years, and he left in 1908. Yep. So or 111 years after that. So many things we talk about today, and sometimes we have arguments about, well, who are you to tell me what to do? Or this is how I've always done it, so, take a hike. It's not a new concept that we, as the hunting community, hold ourselves to these standards.
No, it's
since time began.
It's not new, but it got some dust on it. That's putting it mildly. Which is encouraging to me personally that, here we are having these podcasts. We're not the only ones having these conversations. You're seeing, videos, other people talking about it. We kind of went on hiatus for a while there talking about our ethics that used to be very prominent in hunting literature. Mm-hmm. You read stories of, hunts that took place in the early 1900s and all that stuff. It was about code, honor, adventure, discovery. Mm-hmm. It wasn't tactical.
Right. That wasn't how do I, shoot at 800 yards.
Yes, there was still, wonder and discovery going on, and hunting brought people into those places.
Yeah.
And then, for whatever reason, we shifted away from that. It became technical. It became about guns and ballistics, and everything is product driven, mm-hmm. Which is fine. These are all part, right? And obviously, our funding system is based on sportsmen's investments and purchases and all that good stuff. But that dialogue of honor, adventure. Right. Doing the right thing, making the right choices,
self-restraint.
Yeah, that permeated through everything.
Yeah.
And now, it's starting to swing its way back around again because it is what it is. It's cool.
Yeah.
It's got some real legitimate history that's not fabricated to make a point. It's not a marketing thing.
Right.
And so that's what I've just in the last, I'd say, 5 years, mm-hmm. we've kind of seen this resurgence of people paying attention to it, weighing in on it, having something to say. And maybe that's just part of the cycle.
Yeah.
I hear, and you probably do too, that people are watching and going, yeah, there's some stuff out there that's just not going well for, it's smoke that sucker TV and we're not showing ourselves, we're not showing young hunters, and we're not showing non-hunters a very good picture.
Right. It's certainly not the image, those things you just described are not the image that represent the traits that got us here, that made us well respected and appreciated for the contributions we had made collectively and individually. And I guess, when you stray away from that, you're going to pay a price. And we did.
Yeah. I mean, these groups wouldn't have the traction that they have. They wouldn't be successful in getting their signatures and their ballot initiatives and, seeking out these low-hanging fruit opportunities to kind of drag hunting under the bus. I think without anybody really paying attention, we just started serving that stuff up.
Yeah.
And
as media became more accessible and the barriers to media, I remember growing up, Kurt Gowdy, American Sportsman, was the only hunting and fishing show that I knew of when my parents finally bought a TV when I was 7.
American Sportsman.
Yeah. The barriers of entry and to distribution were extremely high. Ever since that date or that time, every year, the barriers of entry and the barriers of distribution get lower and lower and lower to where we are today, where anybody who has either enough money or the talent to create a platform their message gets to the masses, whether it's a really good message for hunting or one where we look at each other and say, oh my gosh, this is a train wreck.
Well, we can't scratch our heads and go, no wonder people aren't down with hunting based on, some of the stuff. I mean,
yeah.
It's hunting to a lot of folks, from what I can see, is how they interpret trophy hunting. Everything's a thrill kill for a head, and we've allowed some things to define hunting that I think are being undone by hopefully these kind of conversations, but others. I'm seeing outdoor writers picking up on this.
Oh yeah.
More requests that we're getting to come speak to a Rotary about.
Oh really?
Bear chase. Come speak to. We're part of this Montana Master Hunter Advancement deal. They have a whole afternoon set aside to ethics and fair chase, along with landowner relations and history of conservation and all these other things. And certainly for a long time, fair chase and ethics has been part of hunter certification. That's part of the curriculum. It's talked about.
Yeah.
And the young folks that I see coming in, that's also an encouraging component of this conversation. They're looking for sideboards. They're looking for I want to do this right. So what is right? They're looking for, a genuine experience, not a guaranteed. I want to earn it. They've already figured out that the most memorable are the ones that, tag soup. I mean, sometimes you just, you get your hat handed to you, but, you remember those, you log those into your memory bank. And, when I was a young hunter, but just seeing game was a victory.
Yeah.
And then when I first started to have some success, I kind of went through that quantity phase, I got to shoot a little bit of ducks, fill a tag, and then, so part of that too, I think, is generational. You kind of move through that stuff. But young people that I talk to at shows, in their early 20s, just getting into hunting, where's the standards? Where's the rules? Want to do this right. I want the meat. I'm not interested in trophy per se, but I do want to hold out, and shoot a mature animal. That seems to be part of the conservation system I've been hearing about. Not looking for the guarantees.
Yeah.
Want to earn it. And I think that's a big part of why we continue to do this. If I went hunting and was successful every time out, it's like, well,
yeah, where's
okay.
It would get to be boring, and I mean, still being out in the woods would excite me, but if I felt like every time I went out, I'm going to have an elk in the back of my truck.
Look at how many people are taking up bow hunting, and then people that have been hunting with a compound bow or looking at recurves and longbows, going, the challenge. I want to test myself. I want to stress my, Those are all signs that the good, wholesome lifestyle of hunting is still alive and well.
Yeah. Shane Mahoney was doing a presentation a little over a week ago, and it was really fun to listen to Shane talk about all the optimism, the reasons to be optimistic about where we're at and what our future could be in hunting if we just look at it through these lenses that he kind of laid out there. And he talked about this acceptance, how people have accepted that we should have this relationship with the animals we pursue that is different than the guarantee or the, absolutely got to have it. And how when we show that, there are others who may not hunt who are like, hey, I can appreciate that. I respect that. Even if I don't hunt, I respect all these things. So for me, it was, I left there with a big smile on my face thinking, you know what, there are so many opportunities for us to express what we're about, what our motivations are, because people, as much as we may say, it's none of your business what my motives are, we get judged by what our motives are. And a lot of that's expressed in our behaviors. Shane did a really good job talking about that. One thing you were just touching on, Keith, that you brought up to me 2 years ago, and I did not think of it this way. And I was getting ready to go on a backcountry hunt, and you sent me some ideas to think about, and it was about how sometimes fair chase can even be explained in, hey, I want to go someplace where there aren't roads, there isn't agriculture, the impact of man has not altered the behaviors or compromised the places where elk or deer can escape to, or they aren't habituated in the way they are in some of our highly civilized, if we want to call that, highly developed when I say developed, I mean, human presence. And I'd never really thought about that. And then I'm up in this wilderness setting in Arizona, and the elk had I saw this elk, and there was not a chance I was going to catch up to him up in the Kachina Peaks. That was fair chase. In a different sense, not about restricting my weapon, not about whatever, but making the conscious decision that I'm going to go where the landscape gives this elk a huge advantage. He can move through this woods, up these hills, across, over, down, and around way, way better than I can. And I'm not going to have the fact that, oh, there's a highway over there, so he's not going to go that way. And, oh, there's a subdivision over there, so I kind of got him where I want
an
him.
alfalfa field, and he'll be down here at 4:30.
Yeah. And I get that, some people, that's all they have as an opportunity of where they're going to hunt. So you go and you hunt with what's available to you. But when you brought it to my attention, it kind of resonated. Well, yeah, that is part of why I do this, is this aspect of, okay, I saw that elk for a minute over on that other hillside, and in the remaining 4 days, I never even saw his track again, which makes it a whole different experience than what some would want to paint hunting. Oh, it's like fish in a barrel. It's like blah, blah, blah. So after you pointed that out to me, I started thinking about all the things of why I do what I do, or maybe not why, but I do this. That really is a bit of a, the person who says, I want to go to a recurve or a longbow, or the person who says, I want more challenge, whatever it is. And I probably do a lot of things I hadn't really thought of in the context of quote unquote fair chase that really are in the spirit of what fair chase is.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's another cool aspect of the whole conversation. Handicapping yourself. We're handicapped to begin with. I mean,
from our senses, yeah.
Yeah, elk's got 4-wheel drive. We've got 2-wheel drive.
We can't smell the coffee in the morning, and they can smell us.
So, but that, for me personally, and I think if you pull a lot of your listeners, hunting is overcoming challenges and solving problems. Mm-hmm. And so that starts rolling into this, problem solving and self-reliance and that chess match that you're playing, and knowing that you're limited. That's elk's over on that ridge. I ain't getting over there. But, maybe I move my camp. I do, the strategies. That's one of the reasons why I like, stalking, mule deer with a bow. There's just a ton of strategy. Move, don't move. When the time of day, other eyeballs, all that stuff comes in, and you're trying to unravel that. And where fair chase came into all of this was hunting wasn't really, if hunting is overcoming challenges, then fair chase was setting the proper way to overcome those challenges. And if you circumvented, took the easy route, cheated, if you will, then yeah, you might be successful, but it won't be the same. Yeah. It is different. Yeah. And I occasionally still get an opportunity to go into a wilderness hunt, and that's as stripped down and as raw as it is. Mm-hmm. And you really feel handicapped. You really feel small.
Yeah.
And they do have the advantage. Yeah, I got a rifle or a bow, so what? I mean, we're talking mass expanse of forest and rock and steep country, and you can only carry, so much water and so much food. So,
well, the reason I throw that out there is it really struck me when you brought it up, and I hope that the listeners think about, maybe it's not even a conscious decision they've made, but there's probably some, and they may not use the term fair chase, but they're probably doing it in something that has a blend or flavor of this fair chase principle of, not looking for the guarantee, of accepting the challenge, of understanding that this is some level of self-restraint, that if every person who bought a tag filled it, we would not, we wouldn't have much game out there left, or we'd have to really crank back opportunity.
Yeah, you can't overlook the fact that fair chase came along at a time when we needed to recover wildlife, and going back to restraint, we have the capacity to overwhelm wildlife.
Sure.
We just do.
Yeah.
So besides, quotas and limited tags and, one deer, one tag, or one tag, one deer, and all that kind of stuff, that self-restraint component in fair chase allows for wildlife to not only thrive, but their populations continue to grow, which means more hunting opportunity.
Yeah.
We started at a time when there was a lot of sportsmen, there wasn't much for game.
Yeah. Well, a lot of these fair chase principles ended up being codified in legislation. Mm-hmm. I mean, when was the Lacey Act passed? 1901.
There was two of them. That was John Lacey. He was a club member.
Yeah, from Iowa.
Congressman from Iowa. And, if you go back and read, some of the documentation that we have in our archives, you could see the discussions about, well, we got to drop the hammer on commercial market hunting. How do we do it?
Yeah.
And they hatched this plan for this Lacey Act to make it illegal to transport, and that was it.
Yeah.
Beginning of the end.
Yeah. But that was driven by some of these fair chase principles.
It was driven by fair chase principles, but even more so conservation.
Yeah.
Fair chase became a tool in the conservation toolbox.
Right.
That was, conservation was the overarching principle. There's things that help support that. Fair chase was one of them.
Yeah.
And it paid dividends. I mean, people couldn't argue with when you started to see wildlife recovering and hunting opportunities starting to open back up. I told you this the last time we spoke. When my dad was growing up, there were no deer in Ohio.
Yeah.
I mean, you saw a deer track, you called the neighbors. I mean, they had a barbecue.
Look at this.
And so he hunted the very first year that they opened deer season again, and he told me all about that. And, now Ohio's loaded.
Right. They treat them as a nuisance. There's too many of them. The cars are running them over. They're eating shrubs. They're eating crops.
Sure. And that kind of moves into a different conversation about fair chase. We are in some situations now where game management and population objectives require loosening up some rules.
Right.
Require a higher hunter harvest just to keep pace.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying that they're throwing out fair chase, but what they're saying is, okay, seasons are longer. Instead of just a bow season, now there's a muzzleloader and a shotgun season. We're needing to ramp things up here. Mm-hmm. So,
the North American model, or whatever you want to call it, how we've evolved with this, all of our principles, our policies, our laws were geared towards recovery.
mm-hmm.
At some point in time now, at least for a lot of the species, not all of them, we are at recovery, and we end up in this maintaining or managing.
Sure.
It's kind of like, if you want to see a really quick synapse, screenshot of that, think about the American alligator. We had all this protective stuff to get them off the endangered species list. And we used a lot of the North American wildlife principles to do it. But one of those principles is non-commercial use.
Mm-hmm.
Well, guess what? We got so many alligators now. We've had to say, here's a time and place where commercial harvest of this species, we're going to allow that.
Sure.
Because we just are beyond what we can handle with the number of alligators. And if we're going to keep them to whatever tolerance or objective you want to call it, we have to employ some different ideas that we certainly wouldn't use for elk, or we wouldn't use for sandhill cranes, or whatever else. So,
well, as long as boy, you're spinning off into a whole big thing about the value of game meat and all that type of thing. But the thing that comes to mind there when you're talking about the need to harvest is the whole thing that's going on now with feral pigs, feral hogs.
Right.
Definitely a major environmental problem now. Yeah. And there's one case where fair chase has kind of been loosened up.
Mm-hmm.
We're putting helicopters in the air, and guys are going around with ARs and taking care of business. We get that,
mm-hmm.
but the non-hunting public sees that and goes, "Well, this is hunting."
Right. Yeah, that's a hard one to the person who doesn't come from the hunting background and understand this is an invasive species that is destroying so much habitat, displacing native wildlife. A lot of them think these are
killing native wildlife. Yeah. I just saw a deal from Mississippi DNR about how brutal these hogs are on fawns and ground nesting birds.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Carnivores.
Huh.
They'll kill whitetail fawns right now.
So we have that lens through which we see it. Here comes the average American who think they probably think they're a native species for all they know.
Sure.
And we're flying around in a helicopter shooting them.
Or, shooting them at night. So that kind of gets back to a little bit where we're talking about of, what's hunting and what's not hunting.
Right.
And that's even fuzzy within the hunting community because,
mm-hmm.
I know guys that are, hardcore deer hunters and sheep hunters and bird hunters, and they're out hunting hogs, it by any means necessary and possible. But to the non-hunting public, it all looks the same.
Yeah.
And, I struggle with this. Is this a depredation hunt? Is this what kind of hunt is this?
Mm-hmm.
And we also get tangled up in there's a big row right now about coyote contests.
Right.
And, most sportsmen get it. I mean, coyotes, they need managed. They're brutal on all forms of wildlife. My daughter's losing her pet cats to them in our yard.
Yeah.
Which is a whole nother tough deal.
Yeah. But that's not how society is looking at
the
it.
lens is, these guys are just out turning wildlife into targets, and this is hunting.
Yeah.
Well,
and the other side realizes that that's some pretty low-hanging fruit.
Sure. They're salivating over these things.
Yeah, and didn't Montana? You think Montana is probably a little more open to protecting hunting and hunting cultures. But I think we had a bill this last session.
There was a bill. I know that
related to coyote
Oregon
hunting contests.
Oregon was one of the first. Just recently, Arizona. We're good buddies with Jim Heffelfinger down there. I talked to him about it. He understands, all of this all too well. But what he told me, sorry, Jim, I'm quoting you here. He wished the contest thing would go away because it's just a public relations nightmare for Arizona Fish and Wildlife.
Right. Yeah.
And they still want to manage coyotes. They know biologically that those populations need managed. They don't need things getting in the way of being able to go about their business and managing and allowing sportsmen to, harvest coyotes and stuff like that. So, we talked about whistling past the graveyard and looking the other way. I think the contest thing is untenable.
It's as Jim and I'm sure every state wildlife agency person realizes, it creates a level of distraction for them where when that pendulum swings, it doesn't just say, oh, let's stop coyote contests. Let's stop trapping. Let's stop harvest of coyotes and fox and skunks. And pretty soon, that pendulum comes so far before its momentum is like...
It's not rocket science to say, well, if contests aren't okay, then the whole shooting match shouldn't be okay.
Right.
So that's our next ballot initiative.
Right. And we... obviously, we're not going to solve it in a podcast discussion, but having a discussion and asking people to think about some of these and give it some context of how their daily life is and how their hunting is, how they communicate. Because as we've said on past podcasts, we are all ambassadors in some way, shape, or form. The day that you buy that hunting license, you are an ambassador for hunting, and we all have different degrees to which the spotlight is on us.
You're signing a contract whether you know it or not, or like it or not, or accept it or not.
Right. And so for me, I always struggle to tell people what to do or what not to do. It's,
Nobody wants to be that guy.
No. But my goal is, by having discussions, that having you on here occasionally, is to give people reason to think about it. Because I think if most of us think about it in some way, shape, or form, it causes us to say, all right, what could I do more of that's positive? What could I maybe think about? Should I have really done that? I mean, I've got a whole list of things.
Should I have posted my favorite kill shot collection on my Facebook page?
Yeah. I mean, for me, even I did a wolf episode in 2012. It aired in 13. At that time, there was so much pent-up emotion about finally getting wolves delisted, at least at the time, in Montana and Idaho. And now I look back at some of the things I said in that episode that, with a little more thought, I would have probably said them a little differently. I mean, the message or the intention of talking about state control and the fact that all species need to be managed, I'll never walk away from that principle. But the way I messaged it is like, Randy, you probably shouldn't have been as wound up about this as you were.
Well, there was a lot of frustration, and there still is. We're not
not out of the woods
yet. We're seeing... these groups are using the Endangered Species Act as an ATM.
Yeah.
I mean, we're going to propose wolves in this state, and this state, and this state, knowing that if successful, once they get to a level to be delisted, they're going to be able to sue over that. Oh, you can't delist them now.
Right.
And we want them in more. And then there's genetic diversity and connectivity, and then there's this and there's that, and this is just a lineup of lawsuits that just is draining the American taxpayer, sportsmen in particular, that are paying, into these game departments, their budgets to manage all wildlife, not just game. And here, a pile of it is going to
defending lawsuits,
litigation over one species.
Yeah, and so Keith says it's like an ATM, and what he's referring to, for those of you who may not know, is there's a federal legislation called the Equal Access to Justice Act, which is how they get reimbursed for their legal fees at a standard rate based on the locale. So if you're operating in Helena, Montana, and you're paying an attorney on your staff $50 an hour, but you are in the 9th District and your case goes to San Francisco where the reimbursement rate is $300 an hour, that's a pretty good delta, pretty good markup on the margin. The flip side of it also is just it keeps these topics and these issues in the spotlight, and they use them for fundraising. It's I tell people that the wolf is not a canine. It is a bovine, a cash cow for these litigators. And so when you say that it's in some respects, our laws and our policies are used in a abusive manner, whatever you want to say, get hijacked.
Yeah, it's that law is getting hijacked. It was never intended for nonprofits. The Equal Access to Justice Act was for citizen and veterans who felt their civil liberties were being infringed on by a government action.
Right. And that the government, if it was proven they were wrong, the government would have to reimburse the legal costs of that citizen. Yeah.
Well, it's not even if they're proven if they're wrong. It's win or lose.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, that needs fixed. That's craziness.
Right. So I know you guys were pushing a bill in the last Congress, Keith, that at least was going to open up the books to say, here's who got reimbursed under what
transparency.
Case. Right.
Yeah. Where is this EJA money going? Right. And it's millions.
Right. EJA being Equal Access to Justice Act.
Sorry. Acronyms. ATMs.
Yeah.
That's automatic teller machine for those of you listening.
But did that transparency
still
language ever get included in anything?
I should know more about or keeping up on that. Something did happen in that regard, and I think that actually did get...
Yeah, I thought I saw it.
That's, kind of the process. The first thing is, okay, so I don't know if we're digressing here or not, but...
No, there's a rabbit hole worthy of traveling down.
Worthy travel. Well, I think it was in 85 when they passed the Paperwork Reduction Act.
Mm-hmm.
All accountability for where these expenditures were going went away.
Right.
And that is one of the things that the club, and specifically one of our club members, Lowell Bear, wanted to get done is, all right, let's get something that sheds some light. There's some transparency. Here's how many millions of taxpayer dollars are going to these lawsuits, and here's the litigators, and here's how they're benefiting. So that's out in the open, and I'm pretty sure that got done.
Yeah.
And so that's a first step to, the law doesn't need to go away, but the loopholes that are being exploited need plugged.
Right.
And that's,
yeah.
I'm just the fair chase guy.
Right. You're the fair chase guy.
Uneducated opinion.
I'm the guy who gets to throw a hand grenade around every once in a while.
Well, you can throw the hand grenade.
And I'll do it. And there's a group in Tucson, Arizona that absolutely loves making me their target every once in a while. Center for Biological Sterility. That's what I call them. They go by the name Center for Biological Diversity, but if you look at the policies they litigate for, it would result in biological sterility. They have
ecological money laundering.
There you go. They have so many attorneys on staff.
Well, that's their entire...
That's their business model.
Sure.
They've created a franchise...
of suing the government.
Of litigating. And
that's the Forest Service and Fish and Wildlife.
Right. Those are the groups that get sued. You prevail in even the slightest manner, and reimbursed for legal costs of whatever.
And most of these things, especially when it comes to the Endangered Species Act, I won't say ESA because I had to explain myself. It's not because Fish and Wildlife did anything wrong. It's a procedural misstep.
Right.
So they're suing because of missed deadlines.
Right, or failure of this notification, or whatever.
And Fish and Wildlife is just deluged with requests for listing species, and they have to go through a whole impact statement and study, and they've got 6 months to do it, and there's a backlog, and so those are just lawsuits waiting to happen.
Yeah.
So that needs to get sorted out too.
Yeah. Well, we can crawl out of this rabbit hole, but you started down that hole when you said that it was an ATM machine for litigators.
Sorry.
So Boone Crockett Club, we had one of your measures here. We did a YouTube video on it on our channel. Everett Headley came over.
Sure.
And great guy. What we wanted to do is kind of get people's attention and then give them the message that I think is so missed, where people think Boone and Crockett Club is about a record-keeping system that's for chest thumping. And nothing could be further from the truth. And you and I have talked about it. We interjected it in one of our antelope hunts in Wyoming. I came over and we talked about it, you and I and Justin, because it was a Boone, it met the record book sizes and scores to be entered in your book. But I want people to understand that that scoring system was not established so that people could walk around and thump their chest.
It wasn't. It's kind of a tricky deal because without participation from sportsmen, without them obviously hunting, without the conservation system working, trophies wouldn't exist. We already know that. That's pretty sound science.
Yeah.
But without their participation in entering trophies, we would have no data set.
Right.
So that's why their name is listed in the record book. But we're actually keeping track of the animals.
Right.
When we give awards, which we're coming up here next week, we've got our 30th Big Game Awards in Springfield. We're awarding animals.
Right.
It's great that the hunter's there with his family and they hold their certificate, but it's actually for representative of successful conservation.
Yeah.
So that data set is really the point of the records program.
Yeah.
And I was just looking at this the other day. We're approaching 50,000 entries. And, okay, so that's just a number. But if you chart these entries by category, white-tailed deer, mule deer, bighorn sheep, elk, what have you, if you chart them, every one of them reflects the recovery.
Really? Numbers are going up.
Yeah. So, this is a data set, so we can go back to 1900 and how many mule deer were in the book? 2.
Right.
and over time, every one of these things has a growth, and there's some dips for sure. Mule deer was going great guns in the 60s and 70s, and then it rolled over. Entries started to fall off. Now they're climbing back up again. And you can tie all of that stuff to environmental events, game management policy. And so we look at this data constantly and say, well, this is trending good. This is not trending good. Here's the Midwest, trophy whitetail breadbasket and EHD comes through for a couple of years. Guess what?
Yeah.
Entries nose over.
Mm-hmm.
Now they're climbing back out of it again.
Yeah.
And biologists use this data. They're coming to us and going, hey, we're seeing this on the ground. Do you have anything that helps prove what we're seeing? And we can go back historically and say, well, in this county or this drainage or what have you, here's what our data reflects. Unfortunately, our caribou are the ones that are in the worst shape right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're not doing well.
Yeah.
But on the flip side, everything else is doing pretty darn good. Some are outstanding.
Yeah. And so to that point, and I might be wrong in how I say this, and I'm sure you'll add in, but the quality of the habitat can be expressed by how well it maximizes the output of the older of the male species. So if the habitat's compromised, if there's policies, if there's environmental conditions, if there's something going on, the ability for the older of the male species to reach their maximum potential is going to be compromised also.
Trophy, antler, horn size is a direct relationship to habitat quality. I mean, you're an elk hunter.
Yeah.
How often do you see a good, nice, wet spring, good grass growth, and the bulls have got great tops?
Mm-hmm.
The next year, tough winter conditions, dry spring, bulls get to their fourths and fifths and just peter out. Same bull.
Right.
Sheep the same way. Everything the same way. So you obviously there's more to it than that, but habitat is key.
Yeah.
Healthy habitat. Age is certainly a factor.
Right.
So age is reflective of mortality, human caused or natural caused. So if we've got animals that are aging, conditions are good. Mortality is low. If we have animals that aren't aging, not growing their best set of antlers, not getting to 6.5, 7.5, 8.5 years old, then mortality is high.
Yeah.
And that's what some of these game managers are looking at in some of their trophy units going, okay, we're not seeing the age structure that we'd like to see. We're going to back off tags, or we're going to allocate tags, but we need to take more does, or it's been 2 tough winters in a row. We're just going to give it a rest entirely. So they're using, it's a unique data set in that way. The other data sets out there is just population counts, how many heads. Fly around a helicopter and say, well, here's how many we saw, and we've got a formula that says this is how many there actually are.
Yeah.
Well, that just gives you numbers. It doesn't give you any insights into habitat condition. All of these things are tied together. It's ecosystems.
Right.
That gets back to Leupold and everything being interconnected.
Yeah. Well, your data set started when?
The clubs actually started in 1906.
Okay.
With a pretty rudimentary, believe it or not, black bears were by hide, and then they realized, well, that's unduplicatable. I mean, one guy's going to stretch it this way, and the other one's going to stretch it that way.
Yeah.
But the very first book that was published was in 1932.
Okay. So we've got, if we go to just that date, we've got an 87-year data set. There's no game agency out there that has an 87-year data set on any of their species.
Nope.
So
Nope.
it's not, I mean, I think people have a tendency to say, well, why would we do that when we have new types of GPS collars. We've got new models. We've got this, we got that. Well, because it's the oldest data set out there, it has a lot of value because
it does have value. It kind of goes beyond what we were just talking about. Trophy, believe it or not, is responsible in large part to wildlife recovery. The club, through this records program, through this records book, elevated the status of a trophy in support of conservation, in support of game laws and restraint and limited take.
Right.
And so, sportsmen kind of bond into that. You go, well, if I hold out for a bigger one, that one's not going to hurt the herd as much. He's already genetically, he's lived a long life. His offspring are running around all over.
Mm-hmm.
And then back to fair chase again, insisting if you were going to have your name and your animal listed in the book, you would have had it proven to adhere to the rules and principles of fair chase. So it was a proof point thing as well.
Yeah.
And that's why the club is so closely linked to fair chase, because of the records book. People go, well, you have to hunt fair chase here. There's rules of fair chase for record entry.
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting history that I wish more people understood about the Boone and Crockett Club. And anyone, I hope that my listeners have an interest in going back and reading about Roosevelt and Grinnell and all those original people who, I think Grinnell is the most underappreciated.
Completely. In fact, you mentioned book. There's a new book out right now about Grinnell.
I heard about
halfway
it.
through it.
Oh, how is it? I've seen it. I got to get it.
It's. Well, I love this stuff. I know you do too.
Yeah.
So we're kind of homers, but it's really interesting to read. I mean, this guy did it all.
Yeah.
And I mean, he was with Custard, and he was doing dinosaur bone discovery. He was living with the Blackfeet Indians. He was with Bill Cody. He was part of saving Yellowstone Park. Mm-hmm. And this back in the day when we rode horses.
Yeah.
But his, he talked about Roosevelt, where he got his ethic. This guy lived it,
Right.
And he witnessed the slaughter of the buffalo and said this is just not going to end well, and live with the Native Americans and all this kind of stuff. So it's a really good read.
Yeah. And he ended up, I mean, he could have been very wealthy. His dad was a Wall Street guy, and
this delves into some shady dad stuff.
And he did that for a little while, and then decided, I'm going to go do this. And he took over as the editor of what was Forest and Stream magazine, which was the publication at the time. It is, in today's world, you could take all of the TV media, all of the print media, all the digital media, and put it in one place and say, Mr. Grinnell, we're going to give you the editorial control over all that in this one publication, because it was really what was there at the time.
It was it. It's, as the story goes, it's now Field and Stream magazine, but that was the national periodical of the sportsman.
Yeah.
And he used it as a pulpit for
Boy, did he ever.
protection of Yellowstone, into commercial marketing, all these initiatives. He was kind of a mouthpiece for the club in a backhanded way, because he was going to club meetings. They were discussing the problem, the solutions, how to get it done. Part of that was educating sportsmen. And so there's Grinnell penning this stuff and getting it out there. And we talk about the discovery and romanticizing hunting. A lot of that was in there.
Mm-hmm. The thing that I take from Grinnell is there's times where you almost say, crap, I don't need this headache. This is going to really stir the hornet's nest. And I always think about, in the context of his time in the late 1800s, the railroads were the king.
They ruled the roost.
Yeah, in D.C., in every state legislature, they'd been granted so much land by the federal government. I mean, the railroad industry today is a fraction of what it represented of the American power structure in the Gilded Age of the late 1800s. And Grinnell took them on, head on, and said, you are not building a railroad through Yellowstone National Park.
Yep.
And through some way, shape, or form, almost getting throttled, almost getting defeated, he never gave up. He never gave up, and he prevailed. And through, if you read his journals, what he thought was a little bit of luck, a lot of hard work, the relationships, and the fearlessness of saying, okay, the railroads could come and completely destroy my little publication today. They own so much of Congress, they could run me out of business. They could find some way to end all that I'm talking about. But he didn't walk away from that.
No, he didn't flinch.
He just looked it in the face and said, bring it on. And if it was not for that, the amount of species that would probably be off the face of this planet today would be higher.
Sure.
The conservation ethic in America would not be there. And I don't know that Roosevelt, because Grinnell being maybe, 10, 12 years, 15 years older than Roosevelt, he was one of Roosevelt's mentors. And
he was the guy, and you see that in our, meeting minutes and stuff like that. He was the driver behind Roosevelt's conservation agenda in his administration.
Yeah.
In fact, Grinnell had written a review of one of Roosevelt's books.
Right, his first book.
Yeah. And just lit him up. So this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. Here's where the rubber meets the road on this. And Roosevelt went stomping into his office, going to pick a fight. And he, as the story goes, he realized that this guy really did know what the deal was. And they struck up a friendship. And Grinnell is a co-founder of the club with Roosevelt. They're the two that hatched this idea for a national coalition of sportsmen to pick stuff.
Yeah. A lot of people don't realize that Grinnell founded the Audubon Society.
Yeah.
I mean, his legacy of what he did silently or without a lot of fanfare, maybe would be the way to say it.
These guys lived it.
They didn't walk away because, this is going to be tough, or, gee, I'm kind of busy today. I always preach to my audience that conservation has 3 characteristics. It's always difficult, it's always uncomfortable, and it's always inconvenient. And if you read the stuff about Grinnell and what he did, all 3 of those are at every crossroad of accomplishment that he pulled off. I mean, Yellowstone Park, okay, yeah, it was a park, but it had no enforcement. It had no funding. The poachers were just rampant there. The
outfitters were taking guided hunts into Yellowstone.
Yeah. If it was not for his just relentless, never give up attitude and using his pulpit of that magazine, Yellowstone would not be anything of what it is today.
Sure.
And that's a story I wish.
Look at how many people, not just Americans, but from around the world, go to Yellowstone every year and enjoy all the things there are to see and do there.
Mm-hmm.
And how many people know that, it was sportsmen did this.
Yeah.
And they established this and set the rules knowing they could never hunt there.
Yeah. Yeah. And
so that when you start talking about things that non-hunters can learn from a hunting ethic, from conservation, that kind of commitment, that kind of, plant the seed knowing that you'll never taste the fruit.
Mm-hmm.
That's something I hope that more non-hunters can appreciate about what sportsmen have done historically.
Yeah.
And the same thing, getting back to fair chase. Can non-hunters learn anything about the commitments of fair chase, holding yourself to a higher standard that even extends beyond the law?
Yeah. Yeah. Legal isn't necessarily the framework that defines fair
not
chase.
Entirely. It's not the ending point. Fair chase extends beyond that, and it's personal, and everybody carries it, to what degree they carry it.
Yeah.
Which is as it should be. I mean, if there was fair chase, the way we've talked about it in our writings, in our position statement, is more a matter of the spirit of the hunt than a set of written rules.
Mm-hmm.
And if you think about it in that context, that way allows it to be personal. And it's not anything you can legislate. Obviously, there's game laws. There's a hunting season. It begins here and it ends here, and this is what you do. But how people conduct themselves, how they approach it, how they prepare, how they carry themselves, how they represent the activity, that's personal.
Yeah. So in today's world of communication, and I don't want to open a big can of worms here, Keith. So you decide how much of this you want to.
I like to fly fish, so I don't use worms anymore.
Well, I'm a worm dunker from way back, so this will be a good conversation then. But all those things you were just talking about, self-restraint, your own personal ethos, you making the decision without having to be told what's right and wrong. In today's world of messaging and social communication, social media, that's got to be a ridiculously complex web that has tentacles that reach far beyond anything. And I try to get my head around how do you know, it seemed like in its time, Grinnell and Roosevelt shamed people by the use of their media outlets and their pulpits, shamed people into don't wear those hats with those feathers that are resulting in the death of all of these birds. It was almost a shaming approach.
In some respects, yeah.
I don't know that works today. How do you get people to buy in on the bigger ideas when some kind of flip you the bird and say, take with that? And maybe there's not an answer.
I'm not. That's a tough one. Like I said, who wants to be that guy? Nobody wants to be the ethics police.
Right.
But if you are paying attention and you are seeing what's going on and you're seeing where hunting is being attacked and you're seeing, this death by 1,000 cuts and you're seeing groups, spreading lies and lumping hunting together with poaching. And if you're really paying attention to all of that and you really care about the traditions of hunting and you're privileged to hunt, you'll pay attention.
Yeah.
It'll become self-evident that, this free-for-all, hunt how you want to hunt, don't tread on me, don't tell me what to do. Mm-hmm. That's untenable, and it's just not going to go well. Society does away with things that
they don't
are no longer relevant, don't understand.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's even difficult in a hunting sense for people to understand that by harvesting wildlife, we're actually enhancing the population. Oh, no, that's just killing.
Yeah.
And end of story. I mean, even non-hunters that I've had a chance to sit down and talk with that were open-minded, I'm not saying I turned them, but we had an understanding. They okay, I didn't think of it. I never thought of it that way. Well, we don't have the opportunity to sit these folks down
and have
have an in-depth conversation. So, we're in the headline world. Instant headline.
Right.
Clickbait.
Yeah.
And that's a tough playing field for us when this is nuanced.
Yeah.
And it has history and there is connectivity. People are just going to have emotional qualms about wildlife being killed for any reason. End of story. That's it. And if none of this makes sense, all the better. That just proves my point.
Yeah.
So to get back to answering your question, I don't know. I don't think. I mean, certainly the club's position is not to finger point or divide.
Right.
However, and when I hear that, Boone and Crockett's just out there dividing hunters when hunters should be united. Fair chase is actually the opposite. It's uniting a bunch of people behind a particular standard. Right. And yeah, for sure, there's some people on the outside looking in, and they're pushing back. But I guess I kind of wonder, what are they trying to defend something, or are they? This hunting will always be here, and hunting's not under attack because I can still buy my tag and go hunting.
Yeah.
They're not paying attention.
They're not reading my mail then.
you want to get a good dose of it, Google trophy hunting right now.
Oh, yeah. Every type of hunting gets the tag trophy thrown in front of it just because those against hunting know
negative.
That, right, it has that connotation.
It's got a negative connotation of waste and no purpose and thrill killing and heads on the wall.
Yeah.
And boy, that's an easy sell.
Yeah. Well, when it comes to that, Grinnell and Roosevelt and all those guys were able to use the tool of shame. Today, you get the people who say, well, what I do is none of your business. But a lot of those people also will say in the same breath, we're all in this together, quit dividing hunters. We're all in the same boat. And Steve Rinella on his Meat Eater podcast put it probably as good as I've not heard anyone say it this good before, is, well, if we're all in the same boat, how long are you going to keep punching holes in this boat and force us to have to do something to you so we don't all sink?
Yeah.
I don't know how. It's a pretty good analogy.
No,
that explains
it is a good analogy. And I think we talked about this early on. Most hunters just, hey, I'm just go about my business.
Yeah.
Leave me alone. I don't want to hear all this anti-hunting noise. I don't want to hear animal rights noise. I don't want to hear about ethics and stuff like that. But, we ignore these signs at our own peril.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. We either tell our own story and define our own image, or someone else will do it for us.
I did think of something, Randy, when you were talking about, Grinnell and Roosevelt, guilted these people. It was an easier sell back then because we didn't have the game we have.
Right. Oh, for sure.
There was a purpose.
Yeah, that's right. That context is completely different than today.
Yeah. So,
yeah.
Conserve, the fields are full of deer. So this is just my own supposition that because I read these accounts and I see where, sportsmanship, not the pot hunter, not the slob hunter, not the commercial market hunter. We're over here. We're respectable gentleman hunters. Mm-hmm. This is really what they were selling.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. They were.
They were selling. And, we want to hunt tomorrow. We're going to conserve today. This is part of the plan. You can either be part of the solution or part of the problem. Take your pick. And so I'm just saying that it might have been, I'm just spitballing here, but it might have been an easier sell back then because there wasn't as much abundant wildlife and hunting was closed down in a lot of places for a lot of species. And those guys lived through it.
Right. And it wasn't just game species either. It was the birds were taking a shellac, and it was a lot of things. So that probably was a way easier sale. Maybe you didn't even have to quote unquote guilt people.
Yeah. And so what's that? I guess the next question is, well, what's that today?
Yeah.
Is there something you can hang your hat on that goes, well, I see the numbers. I see, hunters being a smaller and smaller percentage of society.
Yeah.
You mentioned Center for Biological Diversity. There's a dozen of those kind of groups out there.
Yeah.
Full of attorneys just looking for ballot initiatives where they can squeeze, where they can make a buck. It's questionable whether they really even care about wildlife with what they're doing. Mm-hmm. Are they gaining traction? Are we giving them more credit than they're due?
Yeah,
they're certainly effective because they're popping up, my Google feeds every day. So.
Yeah, that, and they're effective in, you put tens of millions of dollars into something, say grizzly bear recovery, and here one little group can gum up the whole
unravel
works.
The whole thing.
Sure. But to anybody standing back and looking, is you scratch your head and say, how can everybody involved in this agree we're at that point of recovery, but one little group finds a certain weakness or a path to at least put a block in the road? that, okay, now we got to rebuild the road around that block and spend millions and millions more. And man, it's not just grizzlies, it's wolves, it's whatever. So there's so many factors out there and so many moving parts. I can understand with the inundation of so much news, so much information, why so many hunters say, you know what, I just want to go to deer camp with my brother and my kid. Don't bother me with this stuff. I get that, but I also think about, well, along the way, and not just as far back as Roosevelt and Grinnell, but there's been markers along the way of, okay, what if in 1937 everyone said, I'm too busy, this whole Pittman Robertson thing, I don't want to carry the water on that. That's a pain in the ass.
Yeah, I'm standing in a soup line over the Great Depression, and you want to tax me for my bullets?
Yeah. And so we can come forward all the way to today and find these watershed times where hunters could have easily tuned out and said, don't bother me with that, man. I got bills to pay. I got a job to worry about. I got a family. But somehow, collectively, enough of us came together in our whatever the time and context of the day was, to do some amazing things.
Sure.
And it's why we have what we have today.
Well, I need to go back and listen to your Shane podcast, because I want to listen. I want to hear all those positive things, the sea change, the good news, the hope, and there are those things we're talking about. Like we started off this whole conversation, just having the conversation and not being quiet about it are steps in the right direction.
Yeah, I think so. I never shy away from the conversation. As I get older, I do a lot more listening than I do.
Listening is good.
Yeah. As my grandma used to say, you do too much broadcasting and not enough receiving, referring to her old radio. But I benefit from having those discussions. And I think about what's formed my view of hunting today at age 54 compared to how I looked at it when I was 22. So many events, I made mistakes along the way. I did this and then thought about, it's like, why did I do that? Or why didn't I do this? And so all of those events that have been learning for me haven't come because I read it in a book somewhere. I just, some Moses walked down and handed me the 10 commandments of proper hunting behavior. It wasn't it wasn't always easy, and there were some sticky places where it's like, oh man, I wish that wouldn't happen, or I wish I wouldn't have thought about it that way. But it is what it is, and for me, it's just always, we're in this process, hunting collectively, us as a legacy of hunters. We're always in this process of evaluating what's our relevance, what are we doing, are we meeting these goals that I think since time began in the conservation movement, the goal has been for that next generation. And as Roosevelt would call them, those yet unborn, or those in the womb of time. And that kind of gets back to where I measure. Am I a detriment, or am I, my little contribution, is it a benefit?
Well, the whole conversation we're having today, if you want to sum it up, is about continuance.
Yeah, it is. It's
we love to do this. We see value in it. I see other people seeing value in it. I like to see my kids see value in it, and their kids see value in it.
Yeah,
and that's pretty pure.
Yeah. I don't, and this is one of Shane's points that he talked about, that is a trait of hunters and anglers that society loves, is we share. We share our efforts, our toil. The people benefit from what we do. They may not agree or see it, but we share what we harvest. We share, all these things. And as he said, there's not a culture in the world that does not appreciate and hold in high esteem those who share and give. And we do a lot of that.
Sure.
And so he just goes on. And when you're talking about continuance, Yeah, that's pretty much what drives me. I only had one kid, so as they say, if you only have one child, you're really not a parent because you're going to blame the right child. They don't fight with the other. They have no other kids to fight with, all that stuff. So I say I'm a parent, but some would argue with only one. But it's all about his generation and hopefully the next generation. And that's what got it handed off to us.
Well, here's a good nugget to leave with you here. So I mentioned we've got our 30th Big Game Awards coming up next week.
Yeah.
Part of that, we've invited any youth that was 16 and under that harvested a Boone Crockett animal, regardless of where it sits in the book, to send their animal, put it on public display, and then come to a banquet in their honor.
Yeah.
And so part of my job in this is going through all of the stories that these young people submitted, because when we call them up for their award, we read a little snippet of their thoughts or their hunt or whatever. And it's just the coolest thing. We got 45 kids and their families coming from all across the country.
Wow.
And I've got 45 different perspectives from kids 13 to 17 about their hunt with their family, hunting with their mom, hunting with their dad, their uncles, what they saw when they saw the game, what actually transpired and they missed. Or it's just super cool to read that stuff, and then we start talking about continuance and saying, well, what would our society lose if hunting was taken away?
Yeah.
And you start going down that rabbit hole. And it's irreplaceable.
Right. Yeah. America as I know it, and I only can look at it in that context, it wouldn't be the America that, we don't care about clean air, we don't care about clean water, we don't care about habitat.
Open spaces, preserving anything, conserving anything, food, knowing where our food comes from, earning it, working hard, self-reliance,
I don't even want to think about not having those. I thought you were going to said you were going to end this on a warm, bright,
that was
uplifting.
A warm note.
Okay.
That was a warm note.
It was about the kids.
It was about the kids, and it's just, some of these, I did bring a tear to your eye just reading them, going, man.
Yeah, you invited me back there 3 years ago for that.
That's right. You were our keynote speaker that
and night. That was a very profound day for me with those young people. Just getting to hear all their stories, is sitting down talking with some of them, and seeing their excitement, their enthusiasm, not about the fact that I shot a really big animal. Just about every one of them, the story was, my mom and I were sitting in the tree stands and we were just looking for a doe, and here comes this great big buck, and I shot. I didn't even know what I had, and my dad got all excited.
The neighbors came over, and I got my picture in the paper. And sharing. You talk about sharing. These kids are just, everything's about sharing.
Yeah.
What they saw, the knowledge, the food. We brought steaks over to Grandpap, and
it was. I really thank you guys for having me there that time, because even some of those kids who I met
you noticed we didn't invite you back.
I noticed. I don't blame you. Actually, I did. I got an invite.
You did get the invite, but you had to go.
I have family in town that, given my travel schedule, if I told my wife I was going to leave town again and leave her with family, this entire enterprise could come to a screeching halt. So
it'd be all stacked on the curb when you came home.
With a big sign, free. Keith, I really appreciate it.
I always appreciate it, Randy. It's good stuff. It helps me process talking with you about it. Hopefully the folks listening got some juicy nuggets out of it.
Yeah. For me, my takeaway from this, when I have these conversations with you or Shane or others who spend a lot of time interacting with people, bringing forth conversations about difficult topics, the takeaway I always have is, whether we agree or disagree, the benefit comes from forcing us to think about it and having these discussions. That's invaluable. And that's part of why I started this podcast is I want people to force me to think with the feedback I get, with the guests we have, and hopefully in the process of all that, just like with the magazine the topics you guys are taking on with the magazine, on your social media and stuff, it's not there to tell someone what's right or what's wrong, but let's be thinking about
throwing it out there.
Yeah. So,
well, speaking of we touched on the records deal. I'll do the shameless plug.
Okay.
Most people think to be a member of Boone and Crockett, you have to have a trophy in the record book.
You don't.
It is not the case.
No.
Anybody can join that has a passion for hunting, conservation, Roosevelt, fair chase.
Yeah.
Become an associate member. Go on our website. It's $35 a year.
Right. And I became a lifetime associate, I think it was in 2007. And you know how you go clean out magazines every 3 or 4 years? It's like, I got to take these down to recycle. My Fair Chase magazines don't get recycled. I know people are thinking, oh, you're just saying this, Randy, because Keith is there. No, you come to my house, and the number of those that I have dog-eared, and when we're out filming content, every once in a while I might have a sticky note on the cover that says, Great Mule Deer history story here, and it's a place we're going to be going. I go to a lot of those articles to get some of these little nuggets of what we're going to talk about stories and landscapes and people and cultures. So great stuff. BooneandCrockett.org.
BooneandCrockettClub.com or Boone-Crockett.org.
Oh, you got two now. All right. Or just Google's your
friend. Just
friend.
Google Boone and Crockett and
you'll get there.
Believe it or not, we come right to the top of the page because we're the only ones.
Yeah, imagine that.
Even if you Google Fair Chase.
Oh, really? Wow.
Well, it's a registered trademark of the club.
Oh, is it? Yeah. Okay. Huh. Well, Keith, keep doing all the great work.
Same to you, Randy. Appreciate it.
Hope the club continues to prosper, that 100 years from now when some other people are sitting around having these conversations, they can talk about Boone and Crockett Club still.
I hope so.
Yeah. Thanks for listening, folks. Have a great day.